The objective today is to explain what the Intel manual says about operating on SNaNs and QNaNs. And the last time we talked about what a NaN is, that is not a number. Not surprisingly, they are not a part of the real number line. So that makes me think we're talking about imaginary numbers at this point, right? Well, right from the beginning, I just want to say they are used for debugging purposes. Apparently, a skilled debugger can use these different types of NaNs for different purposes. So I'll try to make this video quick because this part is just really complex and there's not too much I can take away from here. As you can already tell, there's just a bunch of references to other sections, so we're going to blow through this one pretty quickly. But you already have your first question to answer. What are these NaNs used for? And the answer is debugging. So they begin by saying when a floating point operation is performed on an SNAN and or a QNAN, the result of the operation is either a QNAN delivered to the destination, operand, or the generation of a floating point invalid exception, depending on the following rules. So these rules are pretty complex and I've tried to summarize them here. Basically, this first one will say that if this happens, then there's no result being stored in the destination operand, okay? So just don't store it. And then this other one reminds me of being in a bookstore where you're just reading the titles. And to understand that summary, we probably should get to it. So let's start in order. They say that if one of the source operands is a SNAN, okay? So source operand, SNAN. And the floating point invalid operation exception is not masked. So you need to see section 4.9.11.1.1 to understand what they're saying right there with the masking. Well, if the source operand is an SNAN, then a floating point invalid operation exception is signaled and no result is stored in the destination operand. So maybe an awkward sounding question, but what two conditions are identified where no result is stored in the destination operand? So the condition one is the source operand is an SNAN, and then don't forget about this other part like I just did. This other part says that the floating point invalid operation exception must be not masked. So there's your answer. Now, if one of the source operands is a QNAN and the floating point invalid operation exception is not masked, and here's a third part, the operation is one that generates an invalid operation exception for QNAN operands. And to learn more about this generating of an exception, we would want to read section 8.5.1.2. And that's titled Invalid Arithmetic Operand Exceptions, #IA, invalid arithmetic, I assume. We can also read section 11.5.2.1 called Invalid Operation Exceptions, #I. Okay, so let's break apart this sentence. There's those three parts, and then it says you can read over here, but they're going to finish by saying, when all three of those things happen, then a floating point invalid operation exception is signaled and no result is stored in the destination operand, so just like before. So the question is, what three conditions exist when working with QNANs? That will basically keep that destination operand alone as well. So like you see in my summary, basically here's the scenarios in which we're going to not store anything in the destination operand. Now, if either or both of the source operands are NaNs and floating point invalid operation exception is masked, the result is shown in table 4-7, and I'm not going to go over that table. I'll go ahead and scroll down so you can see it, but I'm going to wait for the next video to go over that one actually. As you can see by my notes to myself there, I really do want to save it for the next one. Well, when an SNAN is converted to a QNAN, the conversion is handled by setting the most significant fraction bit. There's that term again. So you're going to set the most significant fraction bit of the SNAN to 1. Also, when one of the source operands is an SNAN or when it is a QNAN, and the operation is one that generates an invalid operation exception for QNAN operands as described in that section we talked about before. And I make a little joke here. The opposite of AI is an invalid arithmetic. Well, then the floating point invalid operation exception flag is set. And you should note that for some combinations of source operands, the result is different for x87 FPU operations and for those streaming SIMD extension instructions we talked about before. So we're going to get different results if we're messing around with those streaming SIMD extension operations. Now Intel AVX follows the same behavior as these instructions, and I don't know much about Intel AVX, so you'll have to do some research on that. Now the last tiny rule here is that when neither of the source operands is a NaN, but the operation generates a floating point invalid operation exception, and these tables are much further down into the manual, but when that happens, the result is commonly a QNAND FP floating point indefinite. And they finish this section nicely by just saying that any exceptions to the behavior described in table 4-7, so right there, as described in the section we're about to read later, and then even further along we'll be reading section 11, well, if there are exceptions to this behavior, then we'll be able to see those, either through the table or those future areas of the manual. Okay, we don't have too many questions here, so let's just make some up to finish the video. So the last two questions, what does the manual mean by mast when referring to an invalid operation exception? That's a question I genuinely don't know the answer to. But this last one is relatively straightforward. What is table 4-7 titled Rules for Handling NaNs? What could this table be used for? So that's operating on SNaNs and QNaNs. Thank you as always for watching.